The turquoise blue waters of the sea look warm and showing signs of a day breeze forming white caps. The seawall houses a cannon that protected this coastline hundreds of years ago. Now a seagull uses it as its perch, peacefully and patiently opportunistic, waiting. A rowboat flies through the sky carrying passengers towards an unknown destination, most likely a one-way trip. It could be their last trip, or it was their last trip, or it may signify a new beginning. A beautiful set of lips appears in the sky as an apparition, a prayer for those making that journey, or a blessing for those that didn't make it. In a beautiful green field, a man stands alone. The quietness and serenity is interrupted by a train traveling overhead through the sky. The scene is peaceful and simultaneously foreboding. There's a sense of finality. Propped up by his generals, a frail, ancient dictator stands in his convertible waving to a crowd, signifying the absurd pretense of strength and the paradox of absolute power. There's a house on the moon with a wonderful view of planet Earth. Finally, we find a man standing in a courtyard with a black top hat wrapped in the American flag. The man created a refuge at Fort Meigs. He now watches the unraveling of a culture as a spectator with concern and contemplation. These are glimpses into the mind's eye of Julio Larraz. He has often said that he's not a storyteller. In fact, he's a wonderful storyteller, but that's not the intention of his work. He requires the viewer to look, dissect, imagine, and create for themselves, a process that can be both frustrating and confusing, but also cathartic. A process that evolves on the wall in front of our own contemplation and perspective over decades. It is precisely this process that makes each work so intriguing, simultaneously so unique. It's really a mystery that we piece together with our own imagination. The work itself is the glimpse we get into Julio Larraz's kingdom. He says, "You are an instrument to a part of your mind that says things you don't even ask. It's buried deep inside of you, and you don't know what it is, why it prompted that, or where it was. You become an instrument of your mind. Sometimes it lets you in." Irony, deception, hypocrisy, mystery, contradiction, foreshadowing, dimensional distortion, and philosophical exploration. These are all ingredients that Julio adds as he explores his visions, dreams, and the metaphysical realm that lies between reality and some other dimension which we cannot understand and simultaneously cannot ignore. He's always making exploratory visits to this world and bringing us back small pieces. Our intention for this film is not to find the answers, but rather to engage in conversation with Julio and about Julio, to extract small pieces of his visions that add to the amalgamation of his concept, which presents itself often on white linen canvas with an array of extraordinary oil paints and the touch of his masterful hand. We hope you enjoy.
I remember once when we had an exhibition of Larraz here in Venice. I was about, I don't know, like 8 or 9 years old, so I was very little. And I remember being very fascinated by the fact that hardly ever does Julio represent the eyes of this myriad of characters that populate his paintings. And I remember asking him about it because I was extremely fascinated by this fact. And what he told me, and this was utterly stunning, striking for me at the time, is that it doesn't represent the eyes of his characters because they would tell too much about what they're thinking.
Well, you know, you end up painting, in the case of painting, that which moves you. What you think is ideal, what's important to you, and not a word more, not a stroke more. Keep it simple. And of the whole, something has to be detailed. That's what holds the whole thing.
Cioè, lui ha un background straordinario, avendo fatto l'illustratore di giornali importanti come New York Times e Washington Post, quindi c'è una miscellanea di tante cose nella sua pittura e quindi sono tutti dei racconti. E quindi come dei bambini che ascoltano i racconti, noi grandi guardiamo la pittura di Julio.
Painting is all about feeling. Painting is the communication you have with whoever sees your work. And if you can pass it on, you've done your job well. The poet is an appropriation I made of Homer, since very little is known about his life and about him. He is, in effect, a model for me.
In Larraz, that poetic quality is absolutely, it's even when he's doing still lifes, never mind with people. Whether it's an eggplant or coconuts or whatever, they seem to have like an internal life, because they are characters on a stage.
You see a still life, but it's actually a raft boat of immigrants going probably to the abysm or going to die. And that's the character of Julio.
Yeah, it gives you the impression that something is about to fall down it's a tension point.
I think of it as a theatrical component, which is very difficult, very, very, very difficult. The great masters have that, of course.
The traditional still life was something I did not like. So I tried to do something that would please me. A still life over a tablecloth white that would seem an object in the moon. It was a photograph that I saw at the White House. One time I had to do some work for Fortune, and there was a beautiful photograph of the moon taken by one of the astronauts, in which it just appears the moon and the black of space. And I thought it was a magnificent thing. I was in my 20s, and then I started putting things on top. As I said, it was, like placing people in a stage that had some meaning, that was specifically there for some reason, sparsely, and yet they occupy an interesting space.
The characters of his paintings are really magical. I have in my house a painting that you will see at the show, his nanny. The lady that used to be his nanny in Cuba, and she's looking to the sea. I get goosebumps. And I bought that painting knowing that it was his nanny. I followed that painting a lot.
These were people that were close to me, that I remember with affection. Some of them I never saw again. Somehow I think they actually honor me.
He represents a whole different perspective of life as it has been and was for us Cubans.
I have painted many different paintings of refugees, people that were desperate and escaped. If you read Madame Blavatsky, Annie Besant, the Theosophists, if you read yoga, Hinduism, you will find that there are planes, dimensions. An astral flight pertains to a flight beyond what we know. It doesn't follow the rules of the laws of nature. Is completely different. And I thought of it, how wonderful it would be so I could get people out of my country through boats that would fly an astral path. That's all there is to it, you know.
When you do these paintings, because there are many paintings with figures in sort of a position of power, dictators or military.
Well, you know, it's what you've lived, it's what you've seen, it's, you know, things that stay with you from your childhood.
Okay.
That some of us unfortunately had to go through. The fact is, you know, by force of I'm here, present, that's it, you know,
Okay.
a dictator.
Does it have a name?
No.
Is this
Don't have
Malacara?
Well, I don't know, it could be Malacara, I don't know. I had to tell him to turn around so I can see who it is. But the name Malacara comes from a change that my mother made to a man that used to work with my aunt. Was a very ugly, enormously built man. My aunt, who was in politics, used to take him along, I guess to scare anyone that tried to do anything, but the man would not kill a fly. He was so gentle. He loved poetry and so forth. But my mother called him Malacara, and it stuck.
She used to call him like that to him? I mean, directly
Yeah,
to him?
Malacara. Malacara, ¿cómo está? How are you? Please come in. But in turn, without her knowing it, he used to call her Agripina. There are people that you remember and you adapt to your work. I'm interested in the life of people and how they intermingle and their power struggle and their dreams of perhaps glory and power and I always enjoy looking at that. I enjoy, I guess like my mother. My mother used to read the paper from one side to the other. She knew what was happening anywhere in the world.
He's almost an encyclopedia. There is so much in the works that he has studied that's been part of his research. For example, Cape Laplace is a real place in the moon.
This promontory is called Cape Laplace, and it's about 10,000 feet up, very high cliffs, overlooking the Sea of Rains. And I thought, you know, perfect place to build a house. These are things that occur to me as I go along. The sole fact that there is a light is that there is human habitation there. There is a heart beating there somewhere. And that in itself, it's great hope.
In fact, I remember thinking, and I've thought this many times, that I want my poetry to have that element of philosophy, your unconscious, the archetypes coming up, and at the same time this theatrical quality that you have in Larraz.
Julio es un artista de trascendencia universal y la historia dará ese veredicto en un futuro, sin lugar a duda, tendrà un lugar muy especial dentro la plastica mundiale.
Qualsiasi frase, qualsiasi cosa che tu gli rammenti di una sua opera, lui ride. Lui subito si ricorda il quadro e gli viene proprio un sorriso dall'animo, un sorriso spontaneo, per cui si ricorda perché l'ha fatto, chi era quel personaggio, cos'era quella luce. Quindi capisci che passione ha mentre dipinge e che quindi le comunica nelle sue opere, anche se magari hanno quelle che hanno una citazione politica o magari più drammatica, però lui c'ha sempre questo velo di ironia che secondo me lui si diverte anche mentre dipinge.
Non cerca, trova soggetti diversi, trova temi diversi, trova il modo di raccontare la vita di ieri, di oggi e a volte anche quella di domani.
And I think that's a big reflection on his work, that he can tap into other visions that he has had.
It's the same as fishing, I would think. You got to get the fish out of the water.
As we descend into Julio Larraz's world, we find the sanctuary that provides a necessary combination of both utopian tranquility and a profoundly dynamic, controlled chaos. Like the characters in his paintings, Julio lives in a world that's full of incredibly interesting artifacts, juxtaposed in a beautiful environment that makes up the oasis of his imagination. He creates and recreates this world on a daily basis, rich in creative avenues and projects, providing him with infinite exploration of both art and architecture. Studying history and philosophy, and surrounding himself with the warmth and beauty of the tropics. It is this ever-changing environment that feeds his inspiration, affords privacy for his irreverent spirit, and brings to life his visions and dreams. He surrounds himself with the subject matter of his subconscious and allows it to permeate the walls of his studio, eventually exiting as another piece of his artistic creation for us to enjoy and contemplate. As we leave, we often feel as though we visited another world or another dimension, a world where beauty, creativity, and imagination is paramount, and the possibilities are limitless.